I now invite all who are able, please let us rise as we read together the gospel acclamation found in our bulletin. Alleluia. They are before the throne of God, and the one who is seated on the throne will shelter them. Alleluia. The Holy Gospel according to John, the 11th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, See how he loved him? But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. As I spoke with the younger members in our congregation, that very simple explanation of a saint is one who lets the sun shine through them. And I believe we have all been in the presence of God's saints. In fact, we are now. But today we remember especially those who have gone on before us, those who have been raised up in the faith, and those who would come to let God's light shine through them and to share that faith with us. As Jesus came back to where Lazarus was, there was a lot going on. You see, 4 days from that time, or before that time, Jesus and his disciples were across the lake. They were in the region of Philip, the Tetrarch. And the reason they were there was because John the Baptist had been beheaded by Herod, and Jesus and his disciples knew it was no longer safe where they were at, so they crossed over to the other side. But as they were there, they had received word that Lazarus, Jesus' friend, was sick. And the disciples expected Jesus to go back. I'm sure the people that were the messengers expected the same thing, but Jesus stayed there. And his disciples did not understand what was going on, so finally he said to them that our friend Lazarus is going to fall asleep. And the disciples were like, cool, okay, he's just going to go to sleep. But then Jesus finally had to tell them that Lazarus was going to die. And still, he stayed. I'm sure Mary and Martha, when they sent that first messenger, expected that Jesus would come because, after all, we're told that if we ask, Jesus will be there. I'm sure they felt more than disappointed when their brother died. They were probably even more disappointed that during the preparations for the funeral, Jesus still hadn't shown up. Finally, on the 4th day, Jesus rides into town. Now Mary goes out to see Jesus. And she said, if only you would have been here, my brother would have lived. Now I look at that statement in many ways. I look at the first part, the if only. And I know that we say that to God a lot. If only, God, you would have done this, then my life would be different. If only you would have let that person be in my life a little bit longer. If only I would have had a little bit more resources, then I could have done more. If only you would have done something, maybe those 11 people in Pittsburgh would not have died. God, if only. I catch myself saying that too. Notice that Jesus does not get angry with her, because Jesus, being part human, understood that grief, understood that pain. In fact, we are told 2 or 3 times during this whole reading this morning, this whole gospel lesson, that it said that he was troubled in spirit. And that word that was used in the Greek is very hard to translate. It's very difficult to really come up with a precise meaning. To me, it might be better said as his heart was broken or his gut was wrenching. It's not so much that we should look and say, well, Jesus was angry, or Jesus was mad, or Jesus just got up in their face. Rather, he was heartbroken. He was heartbroken not only because his brother Lazarus was gone, but because all these people were weeping, and all these people didn't understand yet what was to come. And so Jesus was able to use that situation as a way of showing them what God had intended. And we are told here, the only time in Scripture that we really hear it, that Jesus wept. And I kept wrestling with that many, many times while I was reading it. You know, if Jesus knew what was going to happen, why would he be weeping? Why would Jesus have to weep if he knew he was going to bring Lazarus back to life? And I honestly believe it's because he knew that he had to bring Lazarus back to life. Because Lazarus had already lived his life. He'd endured a lot of hardship, as he endured a lot of good things. But this was the end of his life. And Jesus would now have to raise him to come back here. I think that's why Jesus began to weep. Because he had to bring him back. But he did that so that God might be glorified, but more importantly, so that others might believe in him. You see, the whole Gospel of John, it starts out telling us the same thing. It goes through the middle and announces the very same thing, and at the very end it goes over again why this Gospel was written. It says, the writer of John says, I have recorded these things, even though there are many others, so that you might come to know that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have eternal life. That's what Jesus was doing when he came back. He wanted those who were there to see and to believe and to know without a shadow of a doubt that he was the Son of God. And he was able to glorify God and to point the way to God by doing signs that nobody else could do. And so after he wept, he said, pull that rock away. Of course, Mary and Martha looked at him and said, Jesus, 4 days in the tomb. The stench has got to be bad. Well, that 4 days is very symbolic for us. There were 2 different sects of Judaism. There were some who believed there would be no resurrection, that life was life here on earth and that was it. There were others who believed in the resurrection. And those who believed in the resurrection believed this, that after the 4th day, by that time the soul would have already departed the body. And so Jesus waited until the 4th day. So there could be no doubt that he was who he said he was. And so on the 4th day, he does something that I think is pretty awesome. He says, roll the stone away. Now you think that somebody who could raise the dead could have done this and that stone would have rolled away. And you're right, it could have happened just that way. But God says, brothers and sisters, you're going to be part of this. You're going to be part of what I'm going to do. I want you to be part of this, not only just to believe it and to know that salvation is coming for you, but I want you to be part of something bigger so that you can go out and share with the world what you have touched with your own hands, and that you were part of making this all happen. And so he said, roll the stone away, and they did. And then he cried out, Lazarus, come out. And we are told Lazarus gets up and walks out. They don't really record what the crowd was doing at that point. I'm sure there would have been many different emotions going on. I'm sure that Mary and Martha would have been standing in awe, but they would have been grateful, and they would have been filled with so much love because their brother, who was once dead, was now alive. I'm sure some of the other people were screaming and running away because, hey, let's face it, we've all seen The Walking Dead. But God was there to glorify. That Jesus said, I am doing this so that they might know you, Father. Because I know who you are, and I speak to you every moment of every day, but I want them to know. And so Jesus glorified God. Now the part that is really meaningful for us today is the way that gospel ends. It says, go and unbind him. You see, at that point, Lazarus, well, he'd already faced death, and now he'd come back. And Jesus says we need to symbolically cut those things that previously bound him on earth. Because he is no longer bound by the earth. But rather that God raised him up from the dead. That God brought him back. And because God had done that for him, well, he was indeed very special. Well, the good news for us is the same thing, that we have been brought to life again in God, and it has been done for us in this baptismal font. That when we are brought here by our loved ones, those saints who wanted us to be raised up in the faith, we are brought to this baptismal font, and it is there that we are baptized into a life like Christ, and we are also baptized into a death like his, so that most assuredly we are baptized into a resurrection like his. And at that point, we are instilled with God's Holy Spirit. But none of that happens except for the saints who bring us to this point. And then after our baptism, the saints who surround us, who raise us up in the faith, and who share with us this good news of God in Jesus Christ. Now, some of us can probably remember those folks who were instrumental in our lives, those saints that were so loving and so caring. And I've told you before about my great-grandmother, how she had a way of just being and knowing that God was with her, especially in her garden. And that's where we learned the Lord's Prayer and the Ten Commandments. While she was on her hands and knees, while she was in the garden. I had some parents who tried to bring us up in faith the best they could. But let's face it, once you become a teenager, you begin to know everything. And you think you know better. And I had parents who loved me enough, they let me have as much rope as I needed. And the really awesome thing about my parents was this: they knew that they could plant the seeds of faith, but they may never see that come to fruition. And so they entrusted that to my wife. And she's the one who said, "You're going back to church." And I said, "No." Bet you can't guess who won. But it's because of those folks who loved me into the faith that I've come to know God and know God in Jesus Christ. To know that no matter what I've done, where I've been, what choices I've made, that God can forgive someone like me, so I know He can forgive everyone else. Because of the love of those saints in my life, who were willing to go the distance with me, even knowing quite possibly they would never see what might happen, they still wanted to take that journey because they trusted in God, because they knew that because Jesus said it would happen that way, they said, okay, even though they might not see what might blossom. They had faith in that Jesus who could raise the dead, who by doing that gave them kind of a foretaste of what must to come, because we know that Jesus died on that cross, and after the third day He was raised from that grave. And we know that as He was raised from the grave, God showed us the way to everlasting life. You see, we see all of that, we know all of that. And we hear it time and time again, but sometimes it takes the love of a saint to help us understand it, because instead of just reading that story to us, they live that story out in their lives. That we have those who have gone before us, who have loved us so much that they were willing to give everything so that we might know and experience what they knew and what they experienced. That they heard this word, and this word became real for them. And it was the guiding light in their lives. And they wanted us to know that too. And so we celebrate the lives of those saints, those who have touched our lives, those who let the sun shine through them so that we might get a glimpse of what is to come, but most importantly, so that we might want and be part of that relationship that God has wanted with us for so long. And now comes the really crazy part, the part that I always had a hard time with, is now we are the saints who get to pass that on to future generations. We are the saints who get to pass that love of Christ on to those who are around us. We are the saints who get to do what the saints who have come before us had done for us. And that is to love others into the faith. We have had those examples in our lives. First and foremost, the example of Jesus Christ in this world, who loved this world even though this world would turn against Him, who loved even those who would spit upon Him, who would beat Him, who would put Him on a cross. He looked down at them and then looked up to heaven and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He set the example for us. He set the example that for all the hatred that is in this world, we meet it head on, but we meet it with love. That when somebody does something wrong to us, we seek God's forgiveness for them. That when there is hatred in the world, we respond with the love of God. And that if somebody stands in opposition to us, we listen to them. And that hopefully they will listen to us. That in the craziness that is this world, that we might stand knowing that God stands with us, and if we stand in His light and reflect that light wherever we are, then we are doing what we have been called to do. That we have been called to be His saints, to let His light shine through us. And in doing so, we glorify God. Sometimes it's hard for us to do because sometimes we want to get our theology across, and sometimes we just want to show people that we're right. And you know what? That's not what God wants us to do. God doesn't want us to prove that He is right, that He is God. Rather, God would rather have us love others so they may come to understand. Not to debate them until they finally acquiesce and say, no more, I'm tired. how we love them, even if they don't believe, how we still want to share with them our lives, how we want to feed them or clothe them, how we want to tell them they are loved and forgiven, even if we never come to agreement. That when we do that, when we do it to the least of these, we are doing it for God. As Jesus glorified God by raising Lazarus from the dead, we glorify God by doing His will in this world. And in doing so, we join in the saints of light. By doing so, we honor the memory of our loved ones. The ones who showed us, even on our bad days, that we were lovable. That even when we were fighting and turning away from God, that God still loved us. And they did that because they stood by us. And they helped us when we were weak and when we were stubborn. They loved us through all of that. And that's what God asks us to do in return. To love others into the faith. To glorify God, not by winning the argument, but just being a faithful disciple in this world. And that discipleship sometimes means that we get down on our hands and knees in the dirt, as my great-grandmother did. And while she's tending to the soil and working that garden, she has a conversation with God. And then little people start showing up, wondering who this crazy person is, talking in the garden to no one who is there. They begin to understand that God is there. They begin to understand that they no longer have to say, God, if only you were here. Rather, they say now instead, God, I know that you are here. Please watch over and guide and love whomever it is we are with. God, I know that you are part of my life, and I give you thanks. And I pray that your name might be glorified. Father, show me what it is that I should do. We are no longer a people who say, if only. Rather, we say, God, we know that you are here, and we thank you that you are here. And that no matter what horrific consequence comes into our lives, we might be able to say, God, whatever it is, let your name be glorified. And by turning to God and turning those things to God and responding with love, that's when He is glorified. If somebody throws a rock at us, we don't pick up a rock and throw it back. If somebody shoots a gun at us, we don't pick up a gun and shoot back. Rather, we trust that God is with us, and we respond in love. We respond in prayer. We respond by standing shoulder to shoulder, maybe with those people we might not theologically agree with, but we stand with them so that they may know the presence of God in their lives. And that's when the light shines through. That's when we live out our sainthood in this world. So today we give thanks for the saints who have gone before us, who have nurtured us in faith, who have raised us as God's children. We thank them. We remember them. And sometimes we catch ourselves saying the very same things they said. Because they loved us, we then love others. Sometimes just as they did. Let us thank God for the saints who have raised us up, who have gone before us, and thank God for the saints who sit here next to us. Thank them for their love, for their grace. Thank you for raising me.